Welcome. God bless you. 2024. Can you imagine? In fact, I wish we could just take a moment and all of us ponder the fact that a new year has begun. Tempus fugit, time flies. Anyone listening to me in these messages that are in your 70s or above, it's just good for us to stop and think about the brevity of life. We're living in the bonus years. The days of man's years are 70, of our reason of strength, 80. So I figure once a person hits 70, we've been in our 70s for a while now. These are bonus years. Psalms 90 and about verse 12 it says, "So teach us to number our days, that we may apply our hearts unto wisdom." Time is a limited resource. And the reality of it comes home, or has for me, in these past few years. Life is so brief. David said it's like a handbreadth. The end of my arm, I can see it from birth to death, the whole thing. It's good to think on those things, not to an excess. We shouldn't take anything to extreme, but to ponder that every once in a while. Before you know it, it'll be 2025. It just goes by that quickly. But thank God for the days. The time is a precious thing. Life is a precious thing God gives us. And the lives we live are a gift back to Him for the gift of life He's given us. Well, I'd like to complete our 3-part series, eventually now, on trusting God. I'm going to give a real brief review. Our first message is a conscious choice. Trusting God is an act of our will. Let me give you the definition of it again, too. To trust means to rely on or put confidence in the character or integrity of another. All of us have an inward desire to trust in some things. David said, Psalm 56:3, "What time I am afraid, I will trust in God." I will. It was an act of his will. He chose to do this. Isaiah 12:2, "God is my strength and my salvation. I will trust and not be afraid." Job 13:15, I read the book of Job here in the last couple of weeks. The best way for me to read Job is to sit down and read the book, the 42 chapters, and see his journey of faith. But he said in Job 13:15, "Though he slay me, yet will I trust him." He's remembered for great patience and endurance. I think we should drum roll his trust of God as well. He looked at things and said, they're all unraveling, but I am going to trust God. Act of his will. It's something that must be learned. It's not something, we have this natural desire to trust in something. All of us do. My grandparents, they grew up in the Great Depression. In 1929, they had 2 young children, and the banks failed. So they had the feeling for quite a few years, you just don't trust in banks. Joyce's grandparents took some money and hid it in a fruit jar out in the lawn, and they were going to trust the banks, so they were going to trust what they were going to do, and it molded, they lost it all. The value of paper deteriorated, and they didn't have anything. It was no longer recognized as legal tender. They didn't want to trust in banks. If a few bad politicians come down the road, we say, I don't want to trust in the government. Or you can say, you have a bad experience, a medical experience, so you don't want to trust in doctors. I don't trust the medical. We have this knee-jerk reaction of thinking what we're going to trust in, what we're not going to trust in. Bad experience in a church, all the corruption and the scandals that have went on in the church throughout history. I'm not going to trust in the church. You're not supposed to trust in the church. We are supposed to learn to trust in God. Trust in self. I know I was doing a series of messages on how to deal with sin in our lives. And I was speaking on total depravity. Romans 7:18, Paul said, "I know that in me, that is in my flesh, dwelleth no good thing." And, I was preaching that away. And afterwards, a guy came up to me and he says, "You seem to be a little insecure. Don't you trust yourself at all?" And I remember looking at him and say, "No farther than I can throw a bulldozer." In other words, Paul said, Romans 7 about verse 24, he said, "O wretched man that I am, who shall deliver me from the body of this death?" And then he went, "I thank God through Jesus Christ our Lord, that with the mind I myself serve the law of God, but with the flesh the law of sin." I can never put this confidence in me. and learn. And it's something I have to learn. I learned to trust God. The next message I spoke on about trusting God was why I pick up a penny. In the last month, I bet I picked up 3 pennies. Last Sunday, going to church, I picked up, first thing I saw was a penny, then I saw a dime, and then a nickel, then a quarter. I just kept picking them up on all of them. The reason I did, and I left them at the church, was all of them had on it the reminder, in God we trust. I need to learn that. Just something as small as looking at our currency. It's printed on all of it. It's a reminder. You don't want to trust in uncertain riches, but in God who raises the dead. We want to trust in the living God. Now this message is titled, 3 Young Israelites Who Shook Their World. It's going to take place in Daniel. I recently read Ezra, Nehemiah, and Esther. But before I read them, I read the book of Daniel. We attended, for our Christmas presents to each other, we went to Branson, a whirlwind drive down. We wanted to see Esther, the new musical production that they were putting on of Queen Esther. Oh, I would recommend it to anybody. It was so relevant to the times in which we're living right now. Powerfully done. I would also, earlier this year, we went to, yes, I do have it, went to Pilgrim. This little Pilgrim right here. It's put on by Arise Collective. It ran phenomenal actors, music, the message of Pilgrim's Progress. If you get a chance to see it wherever they're putting it on, they're trying to reclaim the arts and recover it from the fallenness that it has experienced over the last few generations, and bring it back to be used by God. The acting was excellent. I would recommend it. Anyway, we went down and saw Esther, and so I said my Bible reading was just about that time. I would be reading Esther. So before I read Esther, I read the book of Daniel. Then I read Ezra the next day, and Nehemiah, and then Esther. Oh, I would recommend that order of reading those things. All of them are contemporary. This is global, world events. And this is where this message on 3 young Israelites who shook their world comes from. Well, I want to capture the scene as briefly as I can. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego is what their names are most remembered by, but it's Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah were their Hebrew names. They had been given the names of pagan deities. I'm sure when they called each other, they didn't use those names. But that's how they were recognized in the Babylonian culture. No more temple. No more Israel, a nation. The temple's been looted. Everything has changed radically. They find themselves in a circumstance. It would be easy to doubt God was in control. But not them. They had their defining moment. Nebuchadnezzar has a dream. It troubles him. It's from the Lord. He calls his wise men and says, tell me what the dream was. And they said, tell us what it was. We'll tell you. He said, I can't remember what it was. You tell me what it was. And you tell me what it means, or you're going to die. So Daniel, Shadrach, and Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah went before the Lord, and they sought the Lord and said, would you reveal the secret to us? This is their defining moment. They're going to trust God. I mean, outwardly, everything has come apart. They're going to trust God. So that was their defining moment. Let me give you some of the scene here. I'm going to read for you verses 44 through 47 of Daniel chapter 2. And in the days of these kings, he's given the interpretation. He's told about the 4 kingdoms, Babylonian, Medo-Persia, Greeks, and the Romans. And he's told them about this vision that he had. And he's explaining it. In the days of the kings shall the God of heaven set up a kingdom which shall never be destroyed. See, all the other kingdoms had successors. The one that God's going to set up in the end, no successors. This is it. Which shall never be destroyed, and the kingdom shall not be left to other people, but it shall break in pieces and consume all these kingdoms, and it shall stand forever. For as much as thou sawest that the stone was cut out of the mountain without hands, and that it broke in pieces the iron, the bronze, the clay, the silver, and the gold, the great God hath made known to thee what shall come to pass hereafter. And the dream is certain, and the interpretation of it is sure. You don't need to know anymore. I'm telling you exactly what God is telling you. This is it. Then Nebuchadnezzar fell upon his face and worshiped Daniel. Can you imagine this? Political dignitaries from all over the world, and they see the king bow before this Israelite boy and worshiped him. Here's what he said. And commanded that they should offer an oblation and sweet odors unto him. The king answered unto Daniel and said, of a truth, it is that your God is the God of gods and the Lord of kings and the revealer of secrets, seeing thou couldst reveal the secret. What we're getting ready to, this is on the heels of that. It's hard for us to imagine, but Nebuchadnezzar has had an encounter with the living God and revealed truth to him about present tense and future tense kingdoms. What does he do? He didn't learn to trust God because he erects a monument to himself. Let's not be too hard on Nebuchadnezzar. All of us have that capacity within us. Have an experience with God and leave trusting him and go to trusting ourselves and erect a monument to ourselves. Nonetheless, that's what he did. You say, how could that happen? It can happen to any of us. Now I want to give you the message. With that in the background, and we don't know the time frame, but it wasn't too long. He goes out in the plains of Dura and he erects this monument to himself. He calls dignitaries from all over the world as paying him tribute and acknowledging that this is the King of Kings. He's the kingdom ruler here, the monarch. When the music starts, everybody bows and worship the image which I have set up, and he's the head of gold. This looks like Nebuchadnezzar, and it's all gold. It's huge, this huge monument. Well, rather than reading all the details, many of you are familiar with this. There's 3 young Israelites, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. And they said, we've already bowed to the King of Heaven. We are not going to bow to some kingdom of man. If it costs us our life, it doesn't matter. We are not going to do this. So the king brings them in and he gives them another opportunity because it looks bad on him that people on his council are not obeying what he says. And he's kind of declaimed himself as divine, a deity, and I'm a God to be worshipped. He explains it to him. Let me pick up the narrative. In the middle of verse 15 of chapter 3, he said, but if you worship not, you should be cast that same hour into the midst of the burning fiery furnace. And who is that God that shall deliver you out of my hands? The same one who interpreted the dream to him. But he's forgotten that. He's not learned to trust in this God. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego answered and said unto the king, O Nebuchadnezzar, we are not careful to answer thee in this matter. If it be so, our God whom we serve is able to deliver us from the burning fiery furnace, and he will deliver us out of your hands. We're in a win-win. But if not, there's good theology. They're going to trust God if things turn out all right here, or if we go into the burning fiery furnace. But if not, be it known unto thee, O king, that we will not serve thy gods, nor worship the golden image which thou hast set up. Paraphrase the next few verses. He's furious. His visage changed. He said, heat the furnace 7 times hotter, as if that's supposed to intimidate him. Nonetheless, the degree it was at was kind of they melted all the metal. It would have been hot enough. Oh, he's trying to intimidate him. They're not moved at all. He said, get my strongest soldiers, bind them up. They'll bow. No, they're not. They throw them into the burning fiery furnace. The soldiers that throw them in fall down dead. The heat consumes them. And when they get in, the only thing that burn or the fire touches is their bonds, and burns, falls off, and they stand there walking around. And there's a 4th one in the fire with them. And Nebuchadnezzar sees this and said, didn't we just cast 3 in? It seems like I see 4 in there. And the other one is like the sons of the gods. The son of God. And so he says to him, come out, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. Come out of this burning fiery furnace. And when they came out, the princes and all the dignitaries around there went up and they examined them. They didn't even have the smell of smoke on them. They were not harmed at all by the fire. His response, verse 28 of chapter 3, then Nebuchadnezzar spoke and said, blessed be the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, who has sent his angel and delivered his servants, who trusted in him. See, all of that went on, the exchange, and He boiled it down to one thing. They trusted in him, a God they cannot see, to do whatever pleased him with them. But they weren't bound to me, and they weren't bound to any other God. Who trusted in him and have changed the king's word and yielded their bodies that they might not serve nor worship any God except their own. These guys had had a defining moment of trusting God. He saved their lives this one time when he revealed the king's dream. That same God, regardless of what he does with us, we're going to serve him. Trusting God and serving God sounds to me like they go together very well. They hold hands with each other. Self-serving, trust in self. God-serving, trusting God. Therefore, here's how they shook their world. The world is gathered in the plains of Europe just to see this big event of worshiping the golden image which he set up. Therefore, he said, I make a decree that every people, nation, and language who speak anything amiss against the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego shall be cut in pieces, and their houses shall be made a refuge heap, because there is no other God that can deliver after this sort. But it's still their God. It's not his God. God has said, I'm setting you up. And he said he didn't embrace it, couldn't trust that. He thought it was his. Look at this great Babylon that I have built. Later on, that's what he says. He goes out and grazes for 7 years. After that experience, I believe that Nebuchadnezzar came to an understanding that this God is the only God and wanted to make him his God. And he put his trust in him. Let me encourage you with this. It's a learning process, a learning to trust God in times of trial, times of testing. When things are going well and when things go difficult, begin to say to God, I trust you. Just verbalize that. Read the account of those in Scripture who did. As we draw nearer to the end, this message of trusting God is going to become more and more important. Well, who you're trusting. You say the end. Matthew 24, verse 3. And as he sat upon the Mount of Olives, his disciples came unto him privately and said, Tell us, when shall these things be, and what shall be the sign of thy coming and of the end of the age? The church age is going to end. You want to end it with trusting God. Let me give you these two last verses. Psalms 37, verses 3 and then verse 5. Verse 3 says, Trust in the Lord and do good, so shalt thou dwell in the land. You'll find an identity, a place that's yours on this earth. A place when you trust in the Lord and do good. Not trust in the Lord or do good. A lot of people are trying to do good without any acknowledging and trusting of God. It's both of them. You'll find yourself. I'm a man who trusts God. I'm a woman who trusts God. I'm a young person who trusts God. Verse 5 of that same chapter says this, Commit your ways unto the Lord. Trust also in him, and he'll bring it to pass. You'll find God faithful and trustworthy if you commit your ways. Your ways, God gives us opportunity to live. Love me with all your heart, and then live your life. And he says, it's not commit your ways on the Lord or trust him. It's always both. It's the doing and the trusting God. And he says, I'll bring things to pass in your life. Well, until then, I'll leave you with this powerful prayer and powerful. Trust in the Lord with all your heart. Lean not on your own understanding. In all your ways acknowledge him, and he will direct your paths. God bless you.